The TCG market has gone crazy, and Pokemon is at least worth several $billion in market cap size. You have many people who know nothing about Pokemon rushing to Target and Costco to basically get as much Pokemon product as possible for the sole purpose of making money. And the size of Pokemon's user base has at least tripled, if not more, in the last year, which is why you see demand for cards skyrocketing and prices skyrocketing accordingly. I've been hearing and seeing a lot of people saying that we're in a bubble and the market's going to crash and there's so many signals for the top. I don't think any of that is true. I think that there are three clear signals that indicate the downfall of the Pokemon market. And it's rooted in what we've seen in other collectible markets, more specifically recently, the sneaker market. Um, so here are the three reasons that the Pokemon market might fail. And you'd be surprised that it has nothing to do with the scalpers involved. Um, Literally nothing. They're actually increasing the demand, increasing the prices for the product. So, um, the very first one has to do with supply. The entire Pokemon market is controlled by the Pokemon company. And essentially, this entire Pokemon card economy lives or dies by what they do and what they don't do. They are not sanctioned by like any government entity. They're not regulated. Therefore, they can do whatever they want, whenever they want. A perfect example of this is Steam with the exchange trade rates ups for like specific Cisco skins. I don't know the specifics, but I know it's easier to trade up for rare skins and it crashed the entire market. The same thing applies, as in Steam can make an arbitrary change to the market at any point in time. Technically, so can the Pokemon company. So, similar to how the sneaker market crashed because Nike wanted to rein in more profits, they decided to basically print so many of the shoes that were quote unquote hype that they flooded the market with supply. And therefore, what was originally desirable was no longer desirable. And the same thing can happen with Pokemon. At any given point in time, technically, the Pokemon company can basically print unlimited copies of X card and nothing can really stop them. And that in itself is a little bit scary to have all of the power centralized into one single company. Now, here's the reason why, on the flip side, why Pokemon emulates a strong market and why I personally have such faith in the market itself and the company itself. First one is like their track record in history, right? Pokemon cards have not risen in price and or their like significant supply, right? Even though the demand is crazy. And that's due to them being an over 30-year-old company that has basically done the same exact cycle and print cycle, and they have consistencies with sets being printed and then discontinued every 2 years. And they stick to this cyclical cycle that is very predictable and very consistent. And therefore, it gives investors or consumers a lot of confidence on the market. The same thing happens in the stock market today, right? You have the US government that buys a bunch of treasury bills and they have a consistent interest rate, or at least it's foreshadowed by Jerome Powell making these reports or statements. And the same thing applies to like stock markets and the companies themselves that basically report financials on like a quarterly or annual basis, right? The Pokemon company has not really deviated from this pattern, and therefore that inspires a lot of confidence in the market. You know that this set is going to come out like the Greninja set, like the Ninja set. I forgot exactly what it's called. It's going to come out in roughly like 3 months. You know that as an investor, and you know that the 30th anniversary is going to come out in September. You have a roadmap to what is going to happen, and you know exactly that 151 was going to be discontinued in April and January, right? So all of these signals tell you as an investor that there's consistency, and therefore there is a lot less uncertainty, and uncertainty is fear, right? And when you as an investor have a lot of certainty, you're more willing to put more of your money into a specific place. So the first thing is control of supply. That will indicate the downfall of a market if the Pokemon company suddenly deviates from its traditional like printing patterns. And I'm not talking about, they've printed more prismatic evolutions, they've printed more, they're going to print more Ascended Heroes, etc. I'm talking about like massive influxes of supply that are immediate and sudden. So that is the first top or signal that you might see if the Pokemon's about to crash. Pokemon card economy will crash. Now, the second one is probably the most impactful, and that is the price of MSRP sealed products. This also happened with Nike and the downfall of their company, or why it's down so much after like the hypebeast era, and also the reason why the hypebeast sneaker market crashed, right? Nike consistently raised the products of their sneakers to absurd amounts. And essentially what that does is that on secondary markets, it will continually increase the downward price of a product on the secondary markets, because you as the vendor or you as a seller have to make some sort of a profit, right? And every single dollar increase is multiplied each time on the secondary market increase of price, right? So if you raise your sneaker, I feel like back in the day, I don't know exactly what the sneaker market was like. Let's just use an example. Let's just say a sneaker was like $50 and they raised the prices to $100, right? That means the secondary market prices will at least 2x in the original price. So now you're selling a sneaker that was originally $1,000 that now it'll be $2,000, right? Or it was 100, it'll be 200. And that automatically puts like even the most basic cards that are not even like the Chase or Grail cards out of reach for the consumer buyer, and it becomes much less likely and much harder to swallow that price of a card. You know what I mean? Like imagine those like $20, $30 cards that you might go to a card show or buy that you just really like the art for. It's not about the money. It's just because you really like the product. 2xing in price, right? I know Nike raised their prices like at least more than 2x, which basically caused all subsequent prices to rise accordingly. Now, if the Pokemon company suddenly decides to raise prices, which I don't think they will, they might in small amounts, but the Pokemon company is a Japanese company, and they're really culturally ingrained in keeping prices consistent and caring about the customer and keeping everything consistent, unlike Nike or Steam, where or Valve, they can do whatever they want. That's also another reason why the TCG market is inspired so much confidence, is because the Pokemon company holds everything in their hands, but everything that they've done so far and their track record shows that they won't do these things, right? But for example, if an Ascended Heroes ETB, when it first came out, it's like $60 MSRP, right? If they raise that to 100, then the resale value is going to be 200, right? And then when it stops printing, it'll be twice the price. So it'll be like 1.2K versus the 151 price increase was like 600 to 800 right after they stopped printing. That would be 1.2K. Who's going to buy, like who's going to buy a modern set at one ETB for like over $1,000, right? Like eventually any rational person is going to be like, the value just isn't there, right? Like the value isn't intrinsically there like in the vintage sets, because naturally it's been, no one's printing it anymore. It's unattainable unless like you've like saved those cards back in the day. Like the value is there because you intrinsically as the buyer understand that there's value in that card because it's super rare, it's super old. You can't buy it or print it anymore. There's a lot of nostalgia value to it. There's value to your childhood attachment to it. There's at least some sort of logical, tangible value that you can at least rationalize or theorize, right? However, if the Pokemon company just decides to raise prices by like 2x tomorrow, that increase exponentially goes down the path of those future releases. And also, when that set inevitably goes up in price, it'll go up in a multiplicative effect. It's not just like an additive effect, it's multiplicative. And that's exactly what happened in the Nike sneaker market, right? When they raised their prices super, super high, suddenly like a $200 shoe on the secondary market became like $400. It's like at that point, you as the buyer are like, why is it so expensive, right? It's only expensive because Nike raised their prices. It's not expensive for any intrinsic reason, because the aesthetic is better, because there's more hype around it, because this celebrity wore it, or whatever it may be. So a big one is if the Pokemon market will crash if the Pokemon company decides to raise prices dramatically. Now, I think that potentially a 5 to 10% increase in price isn't too bad, but if they do something like crazy, like 20-30%, all the way up to like 100% increase in price for their MSRP priced products, that will kill the market. And as mentioned, it's not just an additive effect downstream, it's a multiplicative effect. So each downstream impact in terms of sealed, the singles to graded slabs will feel that downstream multiplicative effect and become even more expensive, right? And eventually collectors are going to be like, screw it. Why would I pay this much money for this thing, right? But I don't think prices are technically overpriced right now compared to how expensive cards were back in the day, right? Like I think modern sets are anywhere between like $8 to $15 a pack, which isn't too crazy in terms of like the respective price back in like 1999. So again, it's a testament to the Pokemon company and their consistency for how and why things have been so consistent. And if you have a lot of faith in the Pokemon company and you've invested a lot of money into the TCG, know that your entire fate of your entire investment portfolio relies on one company continuing to do the same thing they've done for 30 years. So it's therefore that's the reason why this entire thing is so high risk. And that in itself is crazy. The third reason why the Pokemon market might crash, or a signal that it will crash, and this is probably the most evident and most in your face evidence that you can see as a buyer, consumer of TCG products, unlike the Pokemon company just making an announcement and just changing their ways, right? You would never know that's going to happen unless I tell you, is counterfeits and fakes and dupes. And this happened in the sneaker market, right? A lot of people were like, after Nike raised their prices and the prices got so high, they were like, why would I even buy this shoe for this amount of money when I can buy a comparable duplicate and just have it and wear it or use it or whatever it may be and pay like 1/8 or 1/16 or 1/10 of the price, right? There are a lot of people that you'll see even now on message boards saying like, oh, I wanted to scratch the itch, so then I just bought like a dupe or like, a different language version of that card, or something smaller that still achieves the same goal. And that in itself will cause the downfall of the Pokemon market. If the entire market gets flooded by duplicates and replicas that are equivalent in like quality and like it's almost indistinguishable, one, that if it gets through like authentication stuff, that's like a very obvious thing, right? Which I don't think it will. It could get there, right? But that is an obvious reason why the Pokemon market may crash. The second one is that just there's going to be less demand because a portion of that demand is going to be taken away from those replicas and those dupes. And those people will no longer aspire for those chases and grails and just buy like a a fake copy of that card just to have it, right? That in itself is exactly what happened to the hype beast market, right? Is a bunch of dupes flooded the market, and there's no reason why you'd pay those astronomical prices for those sneakers, or in this case, those Pokemon cards. Now, we're due for a little bit of a correction in the Pokemon market as a whole or aggregate, but by no means do I believe the Pokemon market's going to immediately crash or dip or go down significantly, like in the 90, like go down 90 to 80% anytime soon, right? We might see like a 10 to 20% market correction, but all the fundamentals of the Pokemon market are so strong and so analogous to other markets that exist. Like I'm talking about like the real estate market or the stock market or like any sort of like longstanding financial market that exists. There's a lot of the fundamentals are equivalent or very, very similar to how the Pokemon market operates, right? And if there's any takeaway that you take away from this video is that don't believe the people that like fear monger or they're like Pokemon's going to the moon or Pokemon is, gonna crash and burn. The same thing happens in the stock market. Everyone listens and puts all of their weight and emphasis on what Jerome Powell says as the Fed chair, right? That's everything. He controls the entire economy, and the Fed controls the entire economy. In the same way, in Pokemon TCG, the Pokemon company controls everything. They control the price of the MSRP products. They control the supply, and they also control and can crack down on fraud and dupes and replicas, right? Like that's literally their job. They have copyright. If they can do all those three things consistently as they have, then the Pokemon market is here to stay and will continue to grow. And no amount of like super high prices will change that, because right now the prices are driven by demand, right? If price changes are driven by any other different external factor, then we're going to have a problem. So when those three factors all happen at the same time, the Pokemon market will crash. Now, the first two about price and supply from the Pokemon company, again, that's something that you'll never see coming unless you hear it directly from them or you have some insider knowledge and you work for the Pokemon company or you know the CEO, right? I think the one that you can pay attention to as a consumer and buyer is all the duplicates and fakes that are being created. When you go on eBay right now, you'll see a ton of listings for chase cards and rail cards where you can buy it for like $80, $90 for a replica or dupe of that product. Now, right now, those replicas aren't good, but if they get good enough to the point, that will pose a major threat to the entire Pokemon ecosystem. So invest wisely, and let's hope that the Pokemon company continues their ways, so that we can all continue to enjoy this hobby. And hopefully this video adds value in some sort of way. Thank you.